312, May 24, 1943. North Atlantic, 20 hours west of Ireland, Sea State 5. A thin moon. A conning tower breaks the skin of the water like a knuckle through cloth. Spray lashes the bridge as the U-boat captain raises his Zeiss binoculars and listens for the hollow thump of aircraft. He hears the sea. He hears the diesel's cough. Then, faint, a growing snarl. The night tears open, an Avenger diving out of the cloud deck, radar locked, rockets bristling, its spotlight carving a white lane on black water. In the span of 10 seconds, the hunters become the hunted. By dawn, the radio traffic hardens into a single fact. May will be the worst month the U-boat arm has ever known. Dozens gone. A line of steel broken not by fleets of battleships, but by stubby, slow carriers that were never supposed to decide a war. At Whitehall, a man who has not slept much in 4 years dictates a line that brims with relief and warning in equal measure. Winston Churchill will later remember the U-boat peril as the only thing that truly frightened him. Today, the peril stumbles, not by accident, by design. The small carriers have arrived escorts for convoys, assassins for wolf packs, mobile airfields for the empty places on the map. Their decks are short, their airplanes are modest, their impact is not. How did these flimsy-looking ships, barely 30% the size of a fleet carrier, turn a 1,000-mile death strip into a killing ground for the killers? How did they take lanes the Germans thought were secure transit corridors, refueling tracks, assembly points, and make them vanish? The answer begins long before the Avenger fell out of that night sky. It begins with a gap on a map, a problem of miles, and a promise of coverage that seemed impossible until the day it wasn't. The ocean writes in logistics and erases in loss. In 1940, the Atlantic was a series of choke points that couldn't look more different, but were mathematically the same. The narrow shelf west of Britain, the approach lanes to Gibraltar, the Greenland-Iceland-UK triangle, the equatorial belly of shipping into West Africa and around the Cape. Draw them out, and the pencil pauses at the same place each time the air gap. The stretch too far for land-based patrols to see, shadow, and strike. Boats disappeared there. Convoys vanished into that hole and reappeared lighter by steel and grain and men. The Royal Navy fought with what it had. Destroyers lashed to convoys, corvettes with short legs and fierce hearts, a few long-range aircraft when they could be spared from other fronts. It was not enough. Submarines did not need to sink every ship. They just needed to strangle the flow, to make each voyage a gamble. Speed could not fix it. Courage could not fix it. Only coverage could. Escort carriers were not inevitable results of doctrine. They were a factory answer to a strategic question. Could you build a flight deck cheap, fast, and good enough? You did not need to duel the enemy fleet. You needed to break up wolf packs, blind their scouts, and hound commanders into submerged silence. A ship that could maintain a handful of patrol aircraft over a convoy for the 20 hours around dawn and dusk that long gray window submariners called their own would compound the effect of every other measure already in play. Better radar, better direction finding, better depth charge, better discipline. The first experiments were rough. A captured German merchant hull became HMS Audacity, a deck with a minimal island, and a doctrine that had to be written on the fly. She guarded Gibraltar convoys through late 1941, crude and courageous, showing what a few fighters could do against submarine aircraft spotters and probing boats. Audacity died quickly, torpedoed, and gone in the December dark, but her wake pointed forward. If a prototype could matter, a program would change the game. By late 1942, the program had a rhythm. Merchant hulls converted, new ships purpose-built, launchers bolted, arresting gear strung, catapults refined. Nothing elegant. Everything functional. Their speed barely outpaced a convoy. It didn't matter. Their value was time aloft. Their weapon was presence. Across the Bay of Biscay, in the lanes that U-boats used to exit and re-enter the Atlantic, air patrols began to find boats they had never been able to touch before. On the broad Atlantic routes, the hole in the map began to close. From Iceland and Newfoundland, from Northern Ireland and Scotland, from the Azores once diplomatic doors swung open, long-legged patrol bombers reached deeper. And in the middle, where no land-based aircraft could linger, there were decks. By January 1943, The question was no longer whether escort carriers would change the fight. The question was how thoroughly and how fast. Night action returns. The Avenger claws back into cloud. The U-boat Captain 31, eyes older, throws the boat down. The heavy body shudders and goes blind. He orders silent running and counts. He knows the arithmetic of air. A patrol plane might pass you once and be gone. A carrier group means another and another, orbiting a central point that moves with the convoy. Daylight is not yours anymore. Dusk is a trap. Dawn is a trap. The ocean around you is not emptiness. It is a grid. He feels the first concussions through his feet. Far astern, then nearer. Hedgehog patterns do not boom, they drum. 1, 2, 3, then 20 seconds of waiting. Nothing. That is worse. It means you were missed, but not lost. The escorts above are ranging you in. They will keep ranging. Aboard the carrier whose aircraft found him, it is not romance. The flight deck is tight, the wind shift fickle. A signalman's paddle tips left, then right. A pilot lines a stubby wing against a horizon without features. Men lash down everything again and again. On the hangar deck, ordnance crews fuss over depth charges, fuses, and a cylindrical secret with a mindful handle, a homing weapon that will listen for a propeller and slither toward it. On maps at an operations table, thin grease pencil lines intersect in deliberate patterns. Convoy speeds, escort positions, probable pack locations. The mathematics of attrition will not win this fight. The mathematics of denial will. What happens next is not sudden in the sense of a single week, but sudden in the sense of a system crossing a threshold. Add enough coverage and the behavior of the hunted changes. Pack coordination falters when boats cannot surface to send clean reports. Radio silence ceases to be a tactic and becomes a condition forced on them by survival. When a submarine is driven down for hours, its horizon collapses from dozens of miles to a few thousand yards. It can no longer reposition quickly. It can no longer keep a parallel track and sprint in at night. Underwater, the boat is slow 3 knots on battery against a convoy making 7 to 9. Emissions become confessions. Every minute submerged is a minute without observation. Every battery minute spent today is one you will lack tonight, when you need it most. By March, the carriers and their escorts are not just protecting, they are hunting. They no longer think of a convoy as a passive herd, but as bait, a moving magnet that draws in predators so that support groups, free of the convoy's leash, can fall upon them. The old belief that escorts must never leave the merchantman's side gives way to the idea that an aggressive thrust outward now may save more ships tomorrow. A vocabulary shift marks the doctrine shift. From escort to support, from cover to control. We zoom out. The convoy code names ON, HX, SC, ONS spool across plotting boards. Climate complicates everything. Ice margins shift, fog erases, seas punish, yet the data trend tightens. Sinkings plunge where decks can maintain patrols. U-boat losses climb where carriers can hold contact in vector guns in 3 dimensions. The Atlantic itself seems to grow shorter because the long hours without eyes shrink. Inside the U-boat command bunker, maps sprout red dots. The dots are not ships sunk. The dots are boats that do not come back. Germany did not expect to be surprised by small carriers. Not after early war experiences watching ponderous escort groups struggle to find a contact after a single fleeting sonar hit. Not after wolf packs danced around convoys in the grey Atlantic, running in on the surface like fast torpedo boats, firing and fanning away. The shock is not that air hurts. The shock is where and how often it appears. A chronology of pressure reads like a ratchet clicking forward. Autumn 1941. A crude pioneer, HMS Audacity, proves that even a handful of fighters can disrupt the eyes and claws of submarines along the Gibraltar route. Then she is lost. The lesson, however, is not erased. Summer 1942. The tonnage war peaks in German favor across wide oceans. But the counter-fabrication accelerates. More cheap decks laid. More pilots trained in the art of spotting a thin line on grey water that is everything. Winter 1942-43. Convoy escorts begin to receive new tools, centimetric radar that renders old detectors useless, improved direction finding that can locate a wolfpack assembler by triangulating the chatter of men, forward-thrown mortars that let ships attack without losing sonar contact, pattern depth charges set not by guesswork but by data. Some equipment is revolutionary, some evolutionary, but the cumulative effect is to move the defender's line outward. January to March 1943. Escort carriers sail with more convoys. And more importantly, some sail free, with hunter-killer groups assigned to rove the lanes before convoys arrive and to comb the water behind where packs have been reported. They are not reacting. They are shaping. May 1943. The Hinge. In one brutal, clarifying month, the ocean's math changes. Boats sink in numbers that cannot be replaced. Skilled crews go down in steel rooms 5 meters wide. The commander of the U-boats reads the signals and refuses to confuse courage with strategy. He pulls his boats off the main North Atlantic run. Why did he have to do it? Because a system that relied on surprise met a system that denied it. Because a doctrine built on surface speed met a world where surfacing was a tell. Because what had been an ocean of opportunity shrank into corridors under watch. On a raw morning in early May, a convoy, call it ONS-5, outbound slow, meets a pack head-on in heavy weather. The sea is so bad that both sides pay a price. Several merchantmen go down in short order, but the attackers cannot stay on the surface. Radar picks them up through rain. Aircraft pin them when the light lifts. Underwater, their approach angles warp. The pack loses cohesion. The escorts kill not one, but several boats in the melee. The convoy staggers, but it does not break. The kill ratio in that battle hints at what the month will mean. By June, hunter-killer groups are no longer a novelty. A carrier with 4 destroyer escorts can patrol an oval hundreds of miles wide. An aircraft leaves deck, finds a contact by radar spec, homes in, drops a string. If it loses the boat, another aircraft will pick up the search. If the boat dives, ships take over. If the boat escapes the immediate noose, the carrier turns into the wind again, and the cycle repeats. Fatigue moves from the convoy to the wolf pack. This is not just technology, it is tempo. Consider the life of a U-boat in 1940 versus 1943. In 1940, you exit the Bay of Biscay. You run on the surface at night, a low silhouette in a dark sea. You spend your day asleep at 50 meters, drifting while your radio man scours the ether, and your captain plots intercepts based on sparse reports. When contacts are made, you move to gather with others, taking place in the pack, creeping in under the moon, torpedoes loaded, the surface air wet and cold, but yours. By 1943, in the same sea, your night is not safe. Radar sees you. Aircraft you cannot hear until they are upon you find you far from any convoy. You dive deeper and longer each day. You are at 3 knots, 4 if you must. Your batteries tie your hands. Your air grows stale. You cannot keep up like this. You surface to recharge, but you hug rain squalls and pray not to silhouette. The bridge watch stays frozen with tension while grease pops on the stove below as the cook tries to make something warm for men who have fed off nerves for 30 hours. If this is what happens to one boat, what happens to the system that relies on many boats behaving like fast motor torpedo craft on the surface? It crumples. Behavior changes produce outcomes that no number of incremental technical tweaks could achieve alone. The escort carriers are the forcing function. They change the day-night cycle, they change the geography, they change the calculus of risk. A pack commander who might once have had hours to gather reports and make a run now has minutes before he is flushed, pursued, and held. The lanes he could count on routes to and from patrol areas, refueling rendezvous with supply submarines, points under friendly air coverage become ambush zones. The very act of returning to base becomes perilous. In the Bay of Biscay, boats used to transit with confidence beneath a patchwork of Luftwaffe patrols. Now, aircraft from escort carriers operating near convoy routes reach into that bay's mouth, and along with long-range land patrols, punch patterns of danger into what had been a back porch. The Type 14 supply submarines, the milk cows that let attack boats loiter longer, begin to die. Each loss is not just a hull. It is weeks of endurance clipped off a dozen boats that counted on that refueling. Strategic latency vanishes. The carriers do not fight alone. They are the keystone in an arch that includes everything from refined convoy routing and disciplined radio protocols to intelligence that shortens searches from days to hours. But they are what makes the arch self-supporting. Without a deck over the gap, the arch sags. With it, the arch spans. Let's enter a carrier-ready room in spring 1943, oil in the air, chalk dust on the deck. A pilot runs a finger over a chart. The lines are not decorative. Each identifies a datum point last reported contact, radar fix, Esperado track. He will fly 2 hours out, 2 hours on station, 2 hours back. He knows his aircraft's limits. He knows his own. He jokes about the landing. Because landing on a short deck in a confused sea is a promise you make to yourself, not a guarantee. Then he looks up when the air officer steps in and says, "Listen, there were 3 boats here yesterday. We hurt one. He'll be somewhere down this line trying to crawl away today. That's your box." The pilot nods and confirms frequencies. He is not an ace. He is an assembler of probabilities. Now, through his eyes, witness how the work really happens. An electronic ghost appears at the outer edge of his scope, 2 miles wide, low, intermittent. Could be wave clutter. Could be what he is here for. He shifts course 5 degrees. The ghost stabilizes. He calls a bearing. He descends, not to attack, but to see. If it is a boat, and if it dives, he can plant smoke and pings to guide a ship in. If the boat stays up, he will attack. If he misses, there is another aircraft 30 minutes behind him. If they both miss, the carrier group will lay a barrier patrol on the presumed escape vector. He is not a lone savior. He is a cog in a timing belt. That belt is now wrapped around the enemy's neck. On the surface below, a U-boat captain strains toward the same edge of range. He tries to live between sweeps. He times them by habit now. The pattern used to be fractal. It is now mechanical. Solve for it, and you might see daylight. Miss by 20 minutes, and you are blind again. Inside Allied headquarters, the ones and zeros of the war, up or down, more or fewer, speak in monotone. Ships lost per 100 ships sailed. Escort groups with carriers versus without. Contacts converted to kills. Aircraft flying hours per square mile of ocean covered. These are not romantic numbers. They are budget and blood braided together. Consider the green eye shades view. An escort carrier can carry, at most, a few dozen aircraft. Of those, a fraction can fly at any one time. Their maintenance burden is heavy, their speed is low. But what they offer is not weight of ordnance. It is minutes of detection and minutes of persistence. They convert unknowns into knowns and long searches into guided hunts. If you want to starve a pack, you don't need to sink every wolf. You need to break up the pack before it feeds. Now, consider the German view. Every refit adds a gadget. The radar detector, the snorkel, the bold decoy. Each has its tactical use. None answers the strategic loss of sea room. When the convoy lanes were open water with intermittent patrols, a determined commander could bring his skills to bear. When those lanes become latticed by continuous air cover, his skills turn inward. He becomes an expert in staying alive rather than finding targets. Survival replaces interception as the daily task. That is victory for the other side even before any boat sinks. By early summer 1943, the U-boat headquarters notes the change in letters that no longer arrive, and in the mood of the crews who do. Men who once came back bony and triumphant, now come back bony and quiet. They tell the same story with different endings. We could not get in. We could not stay up. We could not hear ourselves think from the pinging. Some had fired and missed in weather that defeated them. Some had been attacked twice on the way to the station and never reached it. Some had seen aircraft over water they swore could never host them. They do not speak of fear, but of diminishing options. The word stunned does not belong to a single morning. It is the accumulation of such returns. The North Atlantic becomes a strange mirror. The more the escort carriers proliferate, the more monotone the ocean's voice becomes. Submarines speak less. Convoys speak less. The volume of radio traffic drops sharply. But silence tells its own story. Silence from the convoys is discipline. Silence from the U-boats is suppression. When a boat cannot safely lift a mast to send a report, the wolf pack dissolves into loners. A wolf alone is merely a dog trying to find a scent. All the while, the convoy system grows more efficient. Turnaround times shrink, routing improves. The river of food, oil, troops, and trucks grows steadier. War in Russia consumes freight cars like a furnace eats coal. War in the Mediterranean hammers at a peninsula. War in the Pacific climbs island chains. All of that depends on this. The escort carrier contributions cannot be disentangled from the larger fabric, and that is their point. They are the thread that keeps the fabric from fraying where it is thinnest. Let us return to the lanes themselves, the invisible highways across the ocean that navigators know the way a farmer knows fence lines. Before the carriers, these lanes were edges of probability places where a U-boat could reasonably expect to cut in. After the carriers, they become watched places. Not watched continuously and everywhere that was never possible, but watched enough that a commander could not trust the old rhythms. A support group, built around a carrier, can stand off the convoy by 50, 100 miles, sweeping the likely approaches. To a submarine, that means the stalk now risks interception before it yields a shot. It means you cannot loiter near a waypoint for days waiting for the next convoy, when an Avenger or Swordfish may push you under 10 times before noon. Your batteries will not let you wait. Your men will not let you wait. Exhaustion will decide for you. The collapse of the lanes is not a physical thing. No buoy is lifted. No channel is mined. It is a statistical collapse. Routes once profitable turn negative. Distances that once meant escape become merely time for your pursuer to cycle his patrols. Even the terminologies betray it. Killing ground becomes killing grid, and a grid can slide across the map wherever a small carrier sails. In a German port on the Biscay coast, families count the days since last contact. The chalkboard at the base stares back with gaps. A mechanic who has worked on diesel engines since before the war shakes his head at a snorkel head faring clever, yes, but ugly, a patch on a problem that is now strategic, not technical. A young officer, new to boats, listens avidly to veterans who talk not of daring surface attacks at night, but of nightmare depth charge barrages that seemed to go on for hours. Each story has a map inside it, and the map shrinks. And yet, because we are dealing with the sea and men who have chosen the sea, resistance continues. Adaptive behaviors multiply. Boats go farther south. Convoys are probed at the edges of coverage. The Atlantic understands only cycles. But the cycle has turned. Inside, a British escort group built around a compact deck with a number where a name should be CVE something, the commander holds a short conference. He pushes a mug aside and points at a rectangle drawn on a chart. Here, nightfall +2. We fly a barrier along this axis. If he slips south. We put a destroyer there to catch the bubble trail at first light. Don't chase long, reset. Make him choose between air and batteries. This is doctrine made flesh. Do not pursue to exhaustion. Do not be drawn off. The goal is not single, spectacular kills. It is pressure. Pressure is repeatable. Pressure multiplies. On deck, a young signalman stares out over a gunwale that stands only a man's height over the sea and thinks of home. He flicks his eyes to the windsock. He watches the swirl of wake fall behind like rope uncoiling. He has beheld no great battles. He has seen no flagships. He has watched aircraft go up and come back with salt on their wings and, sometimes, not come back. He senses the change in the air not because he reads statistics, but because rumors of dead boats no longer sound like rumors. They sound like tally marks. If the escorts do their job, the convoy he cannot see 100 miles away will pass through the night with a little more certainty than last week. He has narrowed an ocean into a safe passage wider than any canal and yet still small, in the scale of the world, as the thread in a needle's eye. And that, he decides, is enough for tonight. By mid-1943, German signals officers track a new reality in dull codes and longer gaps. Some boats radio home in frantic extremes, depth charges, damage, diving again. Some send nothing. BDU. Watches corridors where boats once gathered go quiet, not because of discipline, but because of absence. Intercepts of Allied traffic suggest the carriers are multiplying. Small carriers, a phrase written with a sneer in 1942, carries a different weight now. But even this misshapes the truth. The carriers are only the most visible piece of a larger timing diagram. Stitch in the rest and the logic holds. HF divided by DF bearings that point the support group toward a probable lane, a long-range patrol bomber nudging a submarine's course into predictability, the carrier group establishing a barrier patrol in the right hour to cut the corner off the boat's escape triangle, an escort captain who trusts his sonar team enough to throw a forward mortar pattern, not by habit, but by calculation. Multiply that choreography across months, and the result looks like collapse to the enemy and inevitability to the friend. The irony bites deep. Germany's U-boat arm had professionalized and innovated ruthlessly in the interwar period, precisely to avoid the stagnation that had doomed it in 1918. It built a doctrine for speed, surprise, and numbers. It built a culture that prized initiative at sea and protected its crews with the best training and engineering it could afford. It expected setbacks and had plans for technologies to meet them. What it did not expect was that the enemy would build an answer that looked so humble on paper. The escort carriers are the industrialization of presence. They are not glamorous. They are not fast. They are boxes checked on production schedules. But they put eyes where there were none. And eyes, connected by radio and backed by steel that can arrive within an hour, are fatal to a system that thrives on invisibility. What happened next made the pattern obvious. A carrier-centered group slashed through waters previously ceded to the night and tore apart a pack trying to form. Another group, trailing the convoy by one day, picked off a damaged boat limping home. In the bay, patrol lines tightened, and boats were forced to choose between surfacing and suffocating. They chose to surface. Many did not choose what came after. In the crew spaces of a U-boat on its last patrol, an electrician checks the fuse panel by touch as much as by sight. He knows the line to the bilge pump is clean, the battery well topped before they left port, the bearings due for replacement next month, if they were ever to see another month. He knows the cook's face and the radio man's cough. He knows, finally, that the ocean has changed character. It is no longer a vastness with occasional points of peril. It is a net, not a tight one, but tight enough. The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Churchill will say later, that peril is not ended by a dramatic duel. It is eroded by a schedule. It is reversed by 1,000 takeoffs and 1,000 landings on decks that creak like floors in old houses. By July, Allied planners are already thinking past the turning point, how to keep pressure high, how to translate the lane collapse into freedom to mass shipping for other invasions. But the memory of the spring is fresh. The carriers did not arrive as saviors. They arrived as the last piece of a plan to deny the enemy his tactics and time. The U-boats still fear the destroyer's whistles and the sharp commands of a practiced anti-submarine crew, but now, more than anything, they fear the long shadow of a low, slow aircraft, where no aircraft should be. They fear that shadow because behind it stands a rectangle of wood and steel bouncing on a gray horizon, and within that rectangle lies a timetable that the sea itself cannot erase. The timetables have replaced the tides, and the lanes the Germans once mapped with confidence have buckled under their strain. By autumn, the German staff will write orders that admit reality without capitulation. Changed patrol areas, changed methods, new technologies pushed to crews already tired. The pressure has been on long enough that what once seemed incredible, the idea that convoy lanes could be policed from moving decks, now seems as natural as lighthouses on a coast. It is hard to remember the map without them. And that is the heart of the story. The collapse of lanes is a collapse of assumptions. The Germans assumed the gap would remain. The Allies assumed it could be bridged. The ocean has taken sides with whoever could spend the most time above it. What remains is to understand not just the days and months of the change, but the mechanism conclusively, how hunter-killer groups did their cold arithmetic, how the killing of supply boats starved entire patrol lines, how the addition of a homing torpedo made a dive less of an escape and more of a delay, how the permission to leave the convoy and strike outward became the permission to end the pack. And then to see what that collapse enabled across continents, how steel and fuel and men flowed unbroken, how campaigns aligned with shipping schedules, how the fear that once held cabinet rooms in its grip began to loosen. The white lane of the Avengers' spotlight returns not as a beam of light, but as the shape of the war. The reveal is simple, brutal, and easy to miss amid the spray. The carriers did not merely protect, they rewrote the enemy's day. Not more bombs, but more minutes aloft. Not heavier guns, but heavier coverage. The moment the ocean's timetable belonged to the convoy, the U-boat timetable ceased to exist. The pivot on land takes one line in a dispatch. At sea, it takes a month of strain. May 1943. Boats lost in a stack that makes even hardened men count twice, and then count again. The commander at Carnival reads, "Returns that do not return." On May 24, he orders what pride resists but arithmetic demands. Withdraw from the North Atlantic transit. The wolves are not dead, but the pack is scattered, hungry, and far from the flock. The inversion of earlier scenes happens in the air first. Aircraft do not hunt for a battle. They hunt for a behavior. A surfaced boat at night was once a knife cutting forward. Now it is a flare announcing itself to radar tuned to centimeters. A dive was once a clean escape. Now it is a pause in a measured chase, a countdown to a forward-thrown pattern, or a cylindrical listener that does not care about bravado. The secret on that hangar deck, an acoustic torpedo carried like a promise, turns the underwater world from sanctuary into echo chamber. Short declaratives follow, like hammer blows over the Atlantic's anvil. Surface, and be seen. Dive, and be held. Run, and be ranged. Wait, and be worn down. Thesis one line plain. Escort carriers collapse the U-boat lanes by industrializing presence. The before and after is stark enough to sound unfair. Before, wolfpacks massed by radio, running hard at night, using the ocean's width as a weapon. After, loners forced under by day, picked up by air at dusk, harried through the night by ships that never lost contact. Before, a lane is a promise. After, a lane is a lure. A scene to reframe the opening image. Night. Bay of Biscay approaches. Early June. A U-boat breaks surface into dark safety learned by habit. The bridge watch studies a sky with no horizon. Nothing. Then a soft ping in a headset. A green insect on a radar tube, miles away aboard a ship the captain cannot see. The aircraft does not swoop for a romantic strike. It orbits, calls bearings, places the boat on a mechanical timetable. The destroyer turns. The paddle signals shift. A pattern throws forward, no grand eruptions, just the drum of contact explosives that speak in geometry. The boat has not been ambushed. It has been scheduled. A second inversion closes an earlier loop, the promise that the escort groups would not be chained to defense. A free-roving group, built around its small deck, patrols 50 miles off a convoy's starboard bow. It is not guarding ships. It is cutting off futures. Contacts ahead of the convoy die before the convoy arrives to notice. The merchantmen sleep and never know the names of the boats that would have killed them. Silence, too, turns inside out. The thin radio discipline that once hid convoys now hides submarines from themselves. A pack without reports is no pack. A hunter without a horizon is a drifter. The ocean's great open loop, find, form, fix, feed, closes with a snap when you can no longer send the second verb. The numbers confirm what the eye already sensed. Merchant losses fall month on month after the hinge. Atlantic traffic grows methodical, then voluminous, then routine. The U-boat loss curve climbs steeply through the spring, a flank so sharp it looks like a cliff. Production can launch new hulls, but production cannot mint new, experienced crews at that slope. And the Type 14 tankers, the milk that made patrol lines long, begin to vanish in a run of bad weeks that feel like a curse. Each one lost is not a tally. It is 10 boats' endurance halved. Behavior drives the deltas more than any single gadget ever could. The acoustic torpedo matters, but it is useless without the hold contact tempo that only airborne eyes can create. Centimetric radar matters, but it is a tool, not the hand. HF divided by DF matters, but only because there is a support group close enough to answer the bearing before the ink dries. Everything depends on the deck. Not the big deck of a fleet's pride, but the small deck of a convoy's patience. The reveal reframes the human scale, too. A U-boat captain in 1941 was measured by how he used darkness. In 1943, he is measured by how he endures it. He cannot time a convoy's zig anymore because he cannot stay on the surface long enough to learn it. He is not out-generaled, he is out-scheduled. Aboard a carrier whose designation reads like a factory part number, the ready room chalkboard carries nothing heroic. Launch times, patrol boxes, fuel states, repair slips. This is the face of the turning. Men in leather jackets and men in oil-stained overalls move a war by the inch and the minute. The actor in the opening shot the Avenger pilot who dove through cloud at 3:12 does not kill the U-boat arm. He makes sure the next flight has a vector. The next ship has a depth setting. The next morning has fewer widows. Consequences roll outward along cables and rails. Convoys stop hemorrhaging, then move without drama. What this enables is not a mystery. It is a calendar. July 19. 43 troops and tanks cross in force for Sicily, the Mediterranean turning point fed through Atlantic arteries now no longer constricted. Autumn tonnage to North Africa flows with a regularity absent the year before. Winter Arctic convoys resume in patterns that know the risk but accept it on better terms. Spring 1944 Operation Neptune's planners count landing, craft, and men not against uncertainty at sea but against tides on a beach. Across the Western Ocean, Liberty and Victory ships leave their slips to a rhythm that no longer feels like defiance, but like industry. A ratio that once looked grim, ships launched, versus ships lost flips, then widens. The sea ceases to be a choke point and becomes a conveyor. On the German side, the adjustment is earnest and incomplete. New detection sets flash warning lights against centimetric pulses, snorkels promise fewer hours on the surface, late-war hulls sketch open a future that will not arrive in time. Tactically, some of it works. Strategically, none of it moves the gateposts back to 1942. You can adapt to sharper teeth. You cannot adapt to losing oxygen. Men's memories convey the shift more sharply than tables do. A merchant skipper who once shaved a cigarette to half-length for blackout walks his bridge with easier steps. An escort sonar team that once flinched at every false contact now trusts patterns and rejects ghosts. A U-boat torpedo man who once loaded with hands steady in adrenaline now loads with hands steady in resignation. He knows he will fire fewer shots this patrol. He knows he will spend more hours listening to a clock under pressure. The cultural memory follows. The sleek, romantic predator of the propaganda newsreel yields to the endurance picture, the mud-colored escort slamming in weather, the carrier deck shining with sprayed salt at dawn, the routine of maintenance displacing the flash of heroics. In the ledger where wars are settled trendlines over headlines, the small carriers earn a line that looks like a hinge. Revisit the cause and effect chain now that the noise has fallen. Because a deck existed in mid-ocean, aircraft could create continuous search patterns. Because aircraft could hold contact, ships could attack without sacrificing location. Because ships could keep location, submarines could not reform packs. Because packs could not form, convoys were attacked sporadically, not in mass. Because attacks were sporadic, the average voyage risk fell below the replacement rate. Because the risk fell, the Allies used the Atlantic like a road, not a roulette wheel. Compress it to letters. DASPRV. Deck to air, to ships, to packs, to risk, to victory. The sequence is inelegant, but the sea is inelegant. It is also decisive. Zoom from micro to macro in one sweep. A petty officer checks a magneto with cold fingers. A signal arcs from a whip antenna and dies in the night. A blot appears on a scope. A destroyer veers 5 degrees. A bomb rack clanks. A battery gauge slides left. A captain hesitates. A boat never finds the convoy. A convoy arrives in Liverpool with every truck it loaded in Halifax. A division trains on those trucks. A beachhead holds because the second wave lands on time. From coil to coast, the line is not romantic. It is real. Not all outcomes are clean. The sea misses no opportunity to punish optimism. Even after the hinge, boats still strike, ships still burn. Men still go over the side in water that steals breath. Weather fights both ways. Equipment fails. The enemy learns, but the variance recedes. The outliers do not re-establish the mean. An Atlantic that once felt like a coin toss becomes a line of credit paid in time rather than blood. And time is the one thing the Allies could magnify into strength. Every week of predictable shipping becomes an extra airfield in England, an extra regiment with full rations in Italy, an extra bomber with full bomb bays over an industrial target. The escort carriers do not appear in the photographs of the great days, with flags flying and crowds cheering. They appear in the logbooks. They appear in the absence of telegrams. A German staff officer plots a new patrol zone farther west, deeper, lonelier. He draws a rectangle that looks bold on paper and feels empty at sea. He knows he will send men out through the Biscay approaches as long as orders say he must. He knows some will return. He knows too many will not. He does not say collapse in his memorandum. He writes, unfavorable development. That is the bureaucratic term for lanes that no longer yield. The broader lesson begins to settle even before the war is decided. Weapons kill. Systems decide. The escort carrier, the smallest striking ship that can keep flying hours over a convoy, proves that logistics can be armored not only by steel plates and gun shields, but by geometry, patience, and radio discipline. It is a lesson navies will pretend to forget and then relearn, decade after decade, wherever wide water lies between factories and fronts. Return to the opening image, date, time, place. May 24, 1943. A knuckle of steel rising through black water. The spotlight falling like a blade. We saw an Avenger dive. We heard the thud. We felt the shock through a submarine's deck. The foreshadowing line promised more than a kill. It promised a schedule. Now, the reversal is clear. The white lane is not the airplane's beam. It is the convoy lane itself, bright to those under its watch, dark to those who used to cut across it. Not through bigger ships, but through more minutes. Not through single combats, but through sustained contact. Not through sinking every boat, but through denying every plan. The ocean did not shrink. It was measured into submission. And on a winter pier a year later, as a column of tanks rolls off a freighter without hurry and a longshoreman wipes his hands on a rag, the victory looks like boredom. No sirens, no flames. Just another convoy inbound, another convoy outbound. Another day when the small decks in the gray stayed on schedule. The wolves were not slain in a last stand. They were starved of time. Presence, the humblest weapon, broke their lanes, and the Atlantic became a road.